The Museum of Teaching and Learning welcomes you to another episode of our series, Teaching in Times of COVID, stories dedicated to the experience of educators in public, private, and home teaching settings. I'm Denise Steedman, your host. Today we're joined by Alison and Sam. Both are elementary school teachers in Orange County. Alison and Sam, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask from the beginning, how did you two meet? Did you meet in school, or since you're both teachers, did you go to the same school? How did that happen?
No, actually, we met at my cousin's wedding. My cousin married his best friend, and we just got to talking and figured out that we were both in education. I was getting my credential at the time, and Sam was already an elementary school teacher.
And what path did you take to teaching? Were you both planning to teach elementary grades, and what grades do you teach right now?
I teach fourth grade in Anaheim.
I teach third grade currently, and I knew I always wanted to help out my community, so I dabbled with the thoughts of maybe possibly becoming a police officer or maybe something in the medical field, and then I came upon education and felt that I could make the biggest difference there, and I'm really grateful that I chose that path because it's been very rewarding.
And Sam, was that the same for you? Were you always looking to teach in the elementary school level?
Yeah, I was. It worked out kind of like the plan.
So did you start your undergrad, was that in education, or how did you come to be a teacher?
It kind of came about a little bit later in my college experience. I was a sociology major. And then later on, kind of in my studies, it led me to education, and it all worked out.
And sociology, of course, is a big aid to teaching at all levels, so that must have served you well.
Yes.
Let me ask you about the March 2020 COVID shutdown, that March Friday the 13th that we all remember. Could each of you tell us how you were notified by your school and what was your reaction? Let me just say this for our listeners. You do not teach at the same school,
we do
correct?
not. No.
Right.
That's correct.
But in the same school district?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. So, Sam, would you start?
It March 13th, 2020. There had been some information leading up to that date that led us to believe that something might have been coming. So it was a pretty interesting week leading up to that date, March 13th. But on that date, we were all sort of following the news of Los Angeles Unified, as they were sort of the leading the way, and everybody was following what they were doing. So I remember quite early that morning, 9 o'clock or so, Los Angeles Unified had announced that they were going to be shutting down due to the pandemic, and so the speculation was pretty high, and we were just kind of waiting for that moment, waiting for the announcement. And by about lunchtime that day, March 13th, I remember our district had announced that they were going to be following suit and shutting down. And at that time, we'd only thought it was just going to be a couple of weeks. So, but yeah, it was very, very sudden after Los Angeles Unified announced what they were doing.
And others have said that it was very close to spring break, so that it didn't seem as long-term as it ended up being.
Yeah.
Alison, how were you notified at your school?
Similar. We heard some rumblings, but we weren't officially notified. At lunchtime, that was the talk of the lunch table. Everyone was, checking their phones and looking for updates. And we even had some teachers quite distraught, and one even started crying just because of the anxiety and the unknown of this virus that was outbreaking so quickly. And then after lunch, that's when we were notified officially that we had 2 hours to close down our classrooms for what we were told 2 to 3 weeks. And that's what we thought was going to happen, that it would literally be 3 weeks. So I just frantically stapled together some work packets for my students, and we had our technician assistant, frantically unraveling power cords for Chromebook computers to send home with students. And, I left everything on my walls, and I just told the kids, do what you can at home, and I'll see you back in 2 weeks. And then, lo and behold, we know that was much longer. But at that time, we literally thought it would be just a 2-week break.
Did you find that your students, Sam, let me ask you this, that your students were a little shocked that this was unexpected for them, and this rush to get home? Were parents frantically trying to pick up kids? And how did you unwind the school day?
Yeah, it was, I can recall all week long, not just the teachers and staff, it wasn't just us that had sort of that sense of anxiety and that sense of unknown. I think the students knew sort of what was going on. I'm sure they didn't really quite know the extent of what was going on and what the pandemic really meant. They just sort of knew there was something going on. And maybe perhaps not knowing exactly what it was made them a little bit uneasy. And I could sense that. But I remember as we were frantically getting ready to send them home for that possibly 2 or 3 week break, we were just trying to calm them down. So I just put on a movie, which I never do, and that's when the chaos began, and I tried to keep it, somewhat subdued, and so that they wouldn't notice what was going on, and just cranked away and tried to unplug all of the Chromebooks, and our technology assistant does a pretty good job keeping them nice and tidy, and so it was a lot of work trying to unplug everything and pass everything out, and it was a chaotic afternoon right after that rainy lunchtime day.
Oh yeah, it was raining on top of all that.
I remember that. Yeah.
I'd forgotten that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good memory.
It was an interesting day.
Similar situation. Just tried to keep calm in front of them, even though I didn't really know exactly myself what was going on. And just talk to them about taking care of their Chromebooks for the 2 weeks I would be gone. And they didn't seem, I teach 3rd grade, so they didn't seem that distraught at the time. I don't think they really understood what was going on. They saw it more like early spring break. So a couple of them were cheering a little bit when the principal made the official announcement to the school over the PA. So I think they thought in their minds it was just like I said, an early spring break.
A little mini vacation
Right.
thrown in there. Both of you have mentioned getting the students' Chromebooks together, having all of the tools they needed to go home with. So can both of you, Sam, you can start, talk about the technology that your school district has provided for you, so that sounds like the students were used to taking their technology home with them and using it, which of course, as we know, next.
Yeah, they actually weren't used to doing that. That was something that we weren't doing. So that's why it was such a big shock to us to be unplugging all of this technology and passing it out to them to say, here, you get to keep it now. And we were like, well, what if it doesn't come back? So it was actually very, very new, not to just the teachers, but also the students. But not only did they get the Chromebook and the charger, but over the following weeks, the district, because of course a lot of the students in our district don't have, they may have had the Chromebook, but they might not have had the infrastructure to support an online environment on their device. And so the district had to quickly figure out, well, how are we going to get internet service to these kids? And so one of the internet service providers, I wish I could remember the name of the company, but they were able to provide hotspots for each of the children. And so over the next 2 or 3 weeks, children had to come in and pick up their hotspot so that they can then use their Chromebook from home with a district-provided hotspot. So it was a big undertaking, and we really couldn't get going until all of that began. So.
Well, and we've heard many stories about students not having access to the internet. So you were fortunate, it sounds like, to have these hotspots, these little small hotspots that they could use at home. Because you both work for a very large school district,
yes,
correct?
Very large, yeah.
Yes.
And your students are younger, so can
Correct.
you talk to
Well, they
also
they also received a Chromebook. Same situation. However, once all the hotspots were delivered, we even stumbled upon even more. This is down the line technology issues because in many households there's multiple children and multiple students using that one little hotspot. So the Wi-Fi was very, very inconsistent, which was problematic when we started our instruction a little bit later down the line using Microsoft Teams.
Let's, because this is the first time that we've interviewed a couple who are both teachers, could you tell us, how did you make teaching from home work? And how did that impact your family life? Because you're home, your students are home, and yet you have young children, one of whom was in school.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak to that, please?
Yes, absolutely. It was challenging, to say the least. Sam took his office. Fortunately, we have an RV parked in our driveway, so he did his teaching from the RV. But as you know, our falls can be extremely hot, and so that soon became, I'll let him talk a little bit more about that, but it became unbearable, so he had to go into school and teach from his classroom. His principal was nice enough to let him do that because no one really was allowed on campus with special exceptions. And then for myself, I taught at our dining room table, and our daughter, who was doing kindergarten via Zoom, was in her bedroom doing her class. And so that was challenging because sometimes, especially in the beginning, it's her first experience doing this. If she had technology problems, she would have to interrupt my teaching, and I'd have to stop what I was doing and help her. But over time, we were very proud of her because she became a really good problem solver and able to solve her own problems. If she got kicked out of Zoom, how did she get back in, and so forth. So, it was a learning experience. And luckily, we also have a 2-year-old son, and he was able to go to Grandma and Grandpa's during the day when all of this was happening. So.
Well, that is impressive that she could do that, because many adults can't get in and out of a Zoom meeting. Did you feel that she kind of naturally adjusted to this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's a social butterfly, so I think that's what hit her the hardest, was not being able to interact with her friends and talk to her friends, not through a computer screen. But as far as the technology aspect goes, they're digital natives, so it was like pretty, second nature to her. And she did want to get back to normal school, though, as soon as possible. And it was unfortunate because it's kindergarten, and kindergarten you do, carpet time and songs and dancing. I mean, there's a lot of physical movement and interaction, and it's just not the same when you have to do it over a tablet.
So you literally were teaching in the dining room.
Mm-hmm.
She was in her bedroom, and that was her classroom.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam, you were at school.
At first, no, I was here. I tried to do it here in the
mm-hmm.
RV, and so in the spring of 2020, everything was fine. I was able to do that until the school year ended. But as the new school year, 2020-2021, began, and like she said, in the fall of 2020, I tried to pull it off, and it just was pretty unbearable out there in the RV, in August. So immediately transitioned to school. There were very, very few of us that went in, wisely, I would say. A lot of people avoided interacting and going into school, but I just didn't really have a choice. So it was pretty safe, and I was the only one working in my classroom, and all of the protocols were followed at our school site in terms of the questionnaires and such for COVID, and it's the way I had to do it for most of the school year until we opened on April 19th, I believe.
Did you find that it may have been an advantage to be back in your classroom as far as being able to communicate in a classroom setting?
As opposed to being at home?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was necessarily more of an advantage for me as opposed to Allison working from home. In either setting, it was probably more challenging for her being here. So in a way, I had an advantage in that regard, but it was more of a challenge for her because she also had our daughter who was here and doing her schooling. But in terms of just teaching my own students, I don't believe there was an advantage. It was just very challenging for them, regardless of the setting, with their teacher, teaching them remotely.
So that was the same. How did you get materials to them? Alison talked about packets when they first went home. How did you handle that?
It was mostly digital. I mean, we had periodically, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 instances that we had. We called them grab and go events, where the principal or vice principal would set up an event where we would be able to pass out materials. Parents would be able to drive through, much like they would pick up their lunches and pick up whatever materials we would want them to have for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. So there were like 3 events that we had that I can remember. But most of everything was just digital, so there really wasn't much to pick up.
Now we're into fall of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and as you said, you've moved back to the classroom. How did you implement some of those changes that came along? Because the classroom was starting to evolve by then. Did you have any in-person learning at that time? Not yet.
No. We didn't return to a hybrid schedule until April 19th of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So in the fall, it was pretty much, teaching like normal, but digitally. And so fortunately for me, I have 2 other 3rd grade teachers, and we work really well as a team. So we collaborated, and we all took on a subject, and we all made digital slides and interactive slides for the students in each of those subjects. And that was kind of our teaching outline for the day. And then we made a second set of what we called interactive workbooks. And that was what we called asynchronous or independent work. And I'm very thankful for our collaboration, because I think I would have cried, had a nervous breakdown if I had to do all of that planning digitally all by myself. But like Sam mentioned, a lot of the materials now, or a lot of the curriculum is digital, so we're really lucky in that regard. And then we were able to use the platform Google Classroom to post all of our assignments for students to access when they weren't logging into Microsoft Teams and hearing the live instruction. So in answer to your question, it changed a lot because in the spring, we mostly were just doing, asynchronous work where they would just be doing independent work. It wasn't us or myself doing live teaching, and then in the fall, it was live teaching in the morning, and then they would do their asynchronous work in the afternoon.
And Sam, in 4th grade, that's a bump up in homework and reading and comprehension and writing. How did that work for you? How do you up that, and how do you assess how they're doing?
It was a challenge. It was a real big challenge. It did not work as well as it would normally work under normal circumstances. So we had to make do. We had to do the best that we can with what we had, and just plug away. Given the circumstances, I think that those students persevered and succeeded as best as they knew how. But I mean, in all honesty, it just was not. It wasn't even close to the same sort of environment that they were used to.
Yeah, 4th grade is a jump in their independence.
Yes,
it's just different.
Yeah.
So, but as you said, sounds like students still excelled, and do you feel that there was a variety of responses that may mirror a classroom? Children who were more adapt to technology, maybe, or more independent?
Yeah, there were some students that really took well to that sort of environment, but I would say the majority did not. It was quite challenging for the majority of the students. It just wasn't the same environment. It was just a really hard and challenging situation for all involved.
For the students and the teachers.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Have you returned to the classroom? You said you didn't even have hybrid until April.
Yes.
So after April, have you returned, or how is that working for both of you?
Well, we're on summer break now, but
yes.
it was a lot better to be face-to-face with our individual cohorts. And I actually, in one regard, preferred it in a way because it was just a smaller class setting and I got to form more intimate relationships. But the engagement improved 100%, and there was a lot, actually zero behavior problems, at least in my situation, because they were just all so happy to be back to school. They just went by the rules. All of them kept their masks on, and they social distanced, and I was really, really impressed on how well they were able to follow those guidelines. I was having major anxiety before we went back, just trying to figure out how are we going to logistically, follow all these guidelines. But the kids did a really an exceptional job, I felt, going back to that kind of situation, just because they were so grateful to not be distance learning anymore.
And Sam, was that your experience?
Yeah.
Well, your students were happy to see you and be in the classroom.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it was a very similar situation. It was just a relief at first. Of course, as weeks progressed, it became a little bit more of a challenge. Because then at that time we're sort of realizing that the drawbacks of this hybrid learning, where they're only there for 2 days a week. So it was great to see them in person and teach them in person for those 2 days a week, but, teaching a child for, in person for only 2 days a week, then you start to realize that has its drawbacks too.
Right.
Students need to be in class in front of a teacher, live learning, and I need to be live teaching 5 days a week, the way that it was designed to work. And so as the weeks progressed, once we began hybrid learning, other challenges presented themselves.
Yes. So that was the new environment.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Because
And of course
now
it was
you
better
have
than virtual learning.
Right.
But still a new set of challenges.
Not complete. Yes.
Correct.
That actually leads me to my next question. Do you anticipate this fall having full-time classroom experience, students?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
now been announced that we are returning to in-person instruction full-time, full day, 5 days a week. And
So
we're pretty excited about that.
Back to normal, yes.
Back
Yes.
to normal,
Yes,
yes.
that
Very
helps with
exciting.
family structure
Yes.
and all of that.
Yeah,
I'd like to just touch on one little thing here before I forget. Let's discuss the communication and support from parents. What has the response from parents been, and did that change as the pandemic continued through last year? Sam, you want to tackle that one first?
I think the parent response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's been positive, and I think that they're happy to have their kids back in person. Yeah.
Did you field a lot of emails or calls from parents with distance learning?
Yeah, there was a lot of confusion, a lot of schedule confusion, a lot of just unknown. There was constant questions about when their child was supposed to be online, when their child was supposed to be at school. Just a lot of confusion in general.
So, Allison, you think there's going to be a big sigh of relief for
Yes.
all involved?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Mhm.
everyone's looking forward to that.
Yes, and plus with the hybrid schedule, I understand why we had to do that, but like Sam was saying, your child is only attending school for half a day, 2 days a week, and so for working parents, that's really challenging. So I think, just schedule-wise, aside from, learning loss, I think that was difficult for parents.
Especially working parents, or
Yes.
maybe odd hours,
Yeah.
and children needing assistance at home. Maybe that was a challenge.
Yeah.
Are there changes that you've made that you think will become a permanent part of teaching moving forward?
Well, yes. I'm hoping, actually, one positive thing, now that I look back at the whole experience, was parent-teacher conferences. We did them virtually, and for the first time in 7 years, I got 100% participation in parent-teacher conference, which was a big hooray. And it was just so much easier now that we live in a digital world, contacting parents and being able to communicate with them in that format. So I hope we keep that practice.
I haven't heard that before,
So-
but that makes sense.
Yeah.
If parents are working, or you can do that.
Yeah.
And they can be at home with their children, taken care of, and doing.
Because they're non-student days, and so it makes it very conducive to their schedule.
Right, you can
Yeah.
accommodate that as
Mhm.
opposed to just set hours at school.
Yes.
And did that work for you as well?
Yeah, very, very similarly. Yeah. And on top of that, I think that students' familiarity with working in an online environment. There's a lot of pluses that can come from keeping everything in a digital format, and using some of the learning management systems that we did. I think that is definitely something that can be taken away and used for many years to come. And the fact that these students were forced to learn how to use them appropriately and use them proficiently, I think that we can take that away. continue to use that for sure.
And since you're both teaching elementary, you're training them to move to middle school and high school, where you foresee more digital learning as they get older. As you say, they've gone through this and at least have seen it and experienced it.
And definitely problem-solving skills, like I was referring to with our own daughter. They had to problem solve when their Wi-Fi wasn't working, or, they got kicked out of Microsoft Teams. How do they get back on? And things like that. I thought that was real-world application that I think skills that they can definitely use later on.
In life, period.
Yeah.
I have one final question for both of you. I'll start with Sam. Sam, what are you most proud of?
I would say that I'm probably most proud of just our entire school, our entire staff, overcoming the challenges that we did, not knowing the answers to many questions. We overcame a lot. Of course, I'm proud of our students for persevering and pushing through the challenges, but we we used each other as a support system, and it was a very difficult time for a lot of us. So I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish given the circumstances.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see that. And Allison?
Definitely want to second what Sam said, as well as resiliency for students and all adults involved. We definitely had to increase our collaboration and perseverance, and it was very challenging, but we got through it, and it's a moment in history that I don't think we'll ever forget.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Definitely very grateful for returning back to normal in the fall, and also just very grateful for the little things that we were taking for granted before the pandemic, and how that kind of changed everything.
Well, Sam and Allison, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Please visit our website, www.motal.org. That's MOTAL.org, to learn more about our exhibits, events, artifact collection, and more. Also, find us on MOTAL's YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. Museum of Teaching and Learning. We educate people about education.
Teaching in the Times of COVID is brought to you by the Museum of Teaching and Learning and is the sole owner of its content.